Welcome to this week's bonus materials from Westeros.org for episode 2 of season 4 of Game of Thrones, The Lion and the Rose. We're going to be discussing some background material as usual. We'll start with that this time, and then we'll go into our highs and lows for this episode.
So, history material. There's a lot of little things I could have picked up on for this episode, but we thought that maybe the Boltons and discussing a little bit more about them, their history.
That charming family up north.
Yeah, the most charming of families. The Boltons have a history of, in the past, they were opponents, antagonists to the Starks. When the Starks were kings, there was a time when the Boltons were independent. They may have claimed the crown themselves and basically ruled as kings in this area. And it was about 1,000 years ago, I think, actually, when they sort of finally got them to bend the knee once and for all to the kings in the north. Prior to that, and after that, there were still conflicts. In fact, there was a fairly famous siege that took place that lasted years. The Dreadfort, the seat of the Boltons, is a place filled with a very dark reputation.
You don't get the name, the Dreadfort, just from nothing, basically. It's not like your comfortable summer vacation home, exactly.
No, not exactly. Rumors are that Lord Bolton had... The Boltons have a room, a sort of a secret room with trophies, grisly trophies, the skins of flayed enemies, and claim that they even at one time wore the skin of a Stark king that they killed as a cloak. So they have a very bad reputation, a scary reputation. Now Roose Bolton, the scion of his family, is now leading it. And now he is someone who has supported the Starks, or seemed to support the Starks. He took part in Robert's Rebellion when he was called to do so. He fought at the Battle of the Trident. One of the details we learn, however, about him is that after the battle, Barristan Selmy was mortally wounded. And Roose Bolton's position, in his way, was, well, cut his throat. He was a loyalist of the king, get rid of him. Robert said no. He wouldn't kill a man for fighting honorably and fighting loyally for a man he had oaths to. So, they actually sent his personal maester to tend to Barristan. So, I mean, that to some degree, he saved Barristan's life. And it shows the sort of man Roose Bolton is, that he was quite harsh on, apparently, what was to be done with Jaime and Varys after the sack of King's Landing. And again, Ned Stark had the position, send them to the wall, and that wasn't one that Robert agreed with, but Roose Bolton was harsher still. So the Boltons are a family who are uncompromising, and obviously his son Ramsay, his bastard son, has kind of picked up this notion that he should act in a certain way, but he is much crueler than his father, or at least. He wantonly cruel.
Yeah, because I mean,
wantonly
it's
cruel,
quite obvious in the books from some comments that we get from Roose Bolton, which we may perhaps get on the show, that there's something wrong with the guy. He's not quite right in the head.
Yeah.
He's the level of callousness and cruelty that he can display very casually. He's not really having any interest in being cruel, but it's just the way he acts, whereas Ramsay seems to delight in it.
Yeah, that's really it.
Yeah.
Bolton is scarily sociopathic. He has very little sympathy or feeling or emotion. He is someone who does what he feels like, but he has a great amount of control, whereas Ramsay seems to have no control at all.
Yeah.
He will go from one cruelty to another because it amuses him. So it's quite the contrast, and you can see the tensions that they're building here between Ramsay and Roose.
There is some differences, I think, we would say, in the relationship, in that Roose seems to be less indifferent to Ramsay's actions. He seems to have more of an interest in what Ramsay does and how he acts, because in the books we get the sense that he's quite
sanguine. He's sanguine out so many things, like, oh well, that's how he is, and we won't go into too many details about how far that goes, I think, because it's really extreme to the degrees where he kind of just shrugs, including things that impact the future of himself and his potential family with his new wife. So
well, I guess we could mention
yes.
in the books he has had another son, a legitimate son, and he's pretty certain that Ramsay murdered that son, and he's kind of just shrugs his shoulders about it.
That son was weak,
Yeah.
and Ramsay he's kind of a brute, but he's strong, strong-willed, and maybe that's what the family needs going into the future. I mean, I suspect Roose Bolton in the novels is perfectly aware of it. There'll come a day that Ramsay might well poison him, and he figures if he gets away with it, well,
Good on him.
good on him. So that's the Boltons for you. The other little detail that's actually noted is I don't think they've actually legitimized Ramsay, because he's still focusing on him as being a bastard. But
This is true.
Ramsay's actually at this, well, not quite at this point, but I mean after the Red Wedding, shortly after.
One of the things he requested
is that Ramsay be legitimized, because he wants to obviously secure the
because
inheritance.
only a king can legitimize a bastard,
Yeah.
so it has to go through a royal decree.
So that is our highs and lows.
No,
Sorry,
that's our
That's our
background.
background. That's our back.
All right, since we actually spoke about the Boltons just now, I thought we could mention the first scene, which is one of our lows in the sense that introducing this woman for Ramsay to his hunting partner as such. The Ramsay of the books would never tolerate any woman to that degree. I think it's fair to say. He likes torturing them. He doesn't really make friends with them.
It's funny. Yes, it's quite true. He's surrounded. I mean, one of the things he has is he has this little coterie, his little posse entourage of guys who are as cruel, as he
But
is.
a woman wouldn't
A
survive.
woman wouldn't survive. I don't think.
No.
I wouldn't leave it out, but it just seems.
Maybe for a while as a game.
I always am suspect because first off, this isn't actually an introduction per se. This is a reintroduction.
This is true.
Miranda.
At first, I didn't recognize her with her clothes on.
Yeah, Miranda is one of the two women who teased and with her naked body, Theon. At the in the last season in the scene where he was eventually castrated. Yeah. So they're obviously playing up. I have a suspicion. What I've read is that the other actress might have been cast this season, or might have been used this season, but the actress actually had to drop out or wasn't available because she was pregnant. And it kind of made me think, well, I kind of think that if they had her available, she would have been the one that they were chasing and hunting with.
It's possible. So maybe they're showing it that he basically plays with them for a while
and then gets tired. Yeah,
it's possible, but it felt a little sensationalist.
I think. I don't have that problem with Chase. Like, he does that. He actually does.
Yes, but having the woman there as
having
well.
a woman is more, but I am deeply suspicious of what they're planning to do with this woman.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, the show doesn't actually have my full 100% trust that when a female character is recurring who has been used in the context of
Nudity.
Transgressive elements that they aren't thinking, just throwing in more of these elements. It's like...
Yeah. It's a concern.
It's a concern, and just like, I like to, when they have people, it's like they have a limited amount of time, that they're actually something that really contributes to the depth and the richness of the story. And I don't, however beautiful these people might be, or however fine the people are, if it doesn't really contribute, it doesn't enrich things for me to be able to get, oh, here's some sex scenes with Miranda and Ramsay. Maybe they'll come up with something. I don't know. So it's more suspicion. And it's a bit odd because they could have done without it and they wouldn't have lost anything whatsoever so far. But I
guess we could go on and say that the other scene with Ramsay and Roose, is probably one of our highlights of the episode. It's a very strong scene, even if the interactions are slightly different. It's certainly, it's a great tension, and it's great acting in that scene, I think.
I agree. Michael McElhatton is someone, very funnily enough, I was very recently started watching The Fall, which is this British TV series with Gillian Anderson starring, but it also had Ian McElhinney, or Barristan Selmy, and it actually has Michael McElhatton in the role, and they were, it was quite interesting to see him in a very different sort of role. Was a corrupt police officer who isn't in control of his emotions like Roose is, isn't always in charge of things. And I think it was quite interesting to see this sort of dynamic where, with Ramsay, where he's like pointing out, well, you're doing stuff without my permission, you're being wantonly cruel, you're not a Bolton, you're a Snow, and holding that over him. It's interesting at the same time, though. Then you have this wonderful idea from the writers, and I think it's a great idea, but maybe it was George's idea, of having Theon go or Ramsay go, well, look, I'll have him shave me. He'll have a razor blade to my throat, and I'm not concerned at all. I've whipped him, I've tortured him into obedience.
Yeah. And certainly Roose seems to be impressed by that. That this could perhaps be useful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's that was an interesting way of showing things. Of course, they really sped up things. I had this impression that we were going to see Ramsay and Reek on their own figuring out how to proceed for a while, and the last thing was going to be getting Roose towards the end of the season up into the north and sort of witnessing all what his son had done. It's very fast. And I think there's a throwaway remark where basically he's sailed, he's taking the ship. So because the fact is that the neck is still held by
he does say
Ironborn.
that the neck is still held, and he had to basically smuggle himself into his own lands.
So that was interesting, a nice nod to the details. I didn't really go into exactly where the Dreadfort is. I'm not sure it's absolutely clear, but the Dreadfort is sort of east, a good deal east, not coastal, but on the eastern side of the north. So it's a fair distance away from Winterfell, fair distance away from the Wall. Not quite, there's the river, the Weeping Waters, the name of that river that we see, connecting it into the sort of the narrow sea and that area. But I quite like those scenes there. And then we have a lot of other stuff, of course, in this episode, which kind of we was mentioning is like it's written by George R.R. Martin, so this is his script for the season.
And it is one of the big ones, and I guess one of our other highlights, the other one that we're going to discuss, is the interactions between Tyrion and Joffrey, sort of at the pivotal scenes of the wedding itself. We were a little disappointed that the wedding had a bit of a feel of a garden party, sort of being outdoors, but once you get down to the whole interaction where Joffrey's taunting Tyrion and Tyrion's response and the tension that builds up between them until Joffrey goes on to drink the wine and eat the pie and not have a good time with that. That's really great acting.
It's great. It's a great send-off, I think, to Jack Gleeson. I think he's someone who has been fairly clear, especially in the last year or so, but he doesn't really like acting. It doesn't really do it.
He certainly does a fine job when he does it.
He does a fine job when he does it. I think I've heard it was several years ago where someone first told us that he didn't really want to continue with it. So and there were rumors that he was like wanting to leave really early, and that I don't think that was true, but I think it was all based on the idea that he wanted to be done. So he is done, and he leaves very memorably. And I think the scenes with Tyrion are you have the full weight of this sort of despicable Joffrey aimed at Tyrion, and Tyrion trying to deal with it.
And eventually just sort of boils over and he starts sort of snapping back at him, however unwise that is. And
good stuff, very good stuff.
Obviously paints himself as the target once Joffrey is dead, and Cersei immediately turns her anger on him. And
now this, I would say this, the wedding party, I mean, part of the bigness of it is the fact that like the final half of this episode is focused on this wedding party, and it shows all these little interactions that take place, but not all of them are as successful as we would have liked.
There are some oddities. We have a strange Tywin and Olenna scene, which seems to be a lot about we have to use Diana Rigg, and so we're going to have Tywin act miserly and sort of complain about the costs of the wedding when in the books he's the one demanding the royal wedding has to be ostentatious. It doesn't matter that it's right after a war. We have to have the full 77 courses and all of that.
I just can't. I mean, he's the patriarch of the richest family in Westeros.
He's not going to let it look cheap.
Look at the sword that he arranged for his son. Look at how
Look at the armor that he and Jaime runs around in the book, basically.
He understands the power of display, of ostentation. To have him acting like it's so out of the character, so wrong. It's just to make him seem like a fuddy-duddy. physically. It's like sort of
Yeah.
terrible word to use about a character, but he's like a funny duddy. Like
I mean, it seems particularly when they write him with Elena, you get all these, like they're sort of the grandpa and granddad sort of, or grandma hanging
kind of like
out.
an odd couple thing.
I hope we're not having a budding romance here. That would be terrifying.
That would be terrifying. I admit I don't, and it's not just because it's not the Olenna of that I read from the books.
Yeah.
She is different. You know, Diana Rigg is very different in appearance, in performance from how George wrote the original Olenna, and that is fine. But I'm finding her,
because they cast someone so relatively prominent and they want to use her, they keep shoehorning her in and writing material, which just seems like it's from the Golden Girls or something.
yeah, that's not sort of a B. Arthur sort of. It's just I don't know. It's just I find it a little tedious sometimes, and maybe that's the whole point. But like, take the scene where she talks to Sansa. Now this is an important little scene, and we're not really going to discuss that one a lot. But you notice like this is long stretch of dialogue from Olenna and nothing from Sansa, and it's like Olenna seems to be there to like lecture and just expound, and there's
seems
none
odd,
of
even
a
if
snappy back and forth.
They want to show Sansa obviously as very depressed and such, but Sansa's politeness always seems to override that. She would at
say
least
something.
say something.
And I think Olenna would have let her have room to say something. It was a bit. It felt, if you look at the direction of it, you could almost feel that Sophie Turner was finding it difficult to just sit there and politely listen and say nothing. This seems like, because we were waiting for a chance to say something, and there's no lines there. And again, that I had to suspect is George deciding that not, and that's a mistake. George should have give her something to say.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people sort of being shoehorned together here, because then we have Cersei and Brienne, another one where Brienne just has to come and talk to people, because again, she's not really there in the books, and so they have to find material for her and find having a bit of an interaction with Joffrey and Marjorie and Cersei that works until the point where Cersei feels prompted to point out, oh, and you love him, don't you?
Oh, George, no.
Yeah.
It feels like something. It feels like something out of a daytime soap to all of a sudden have that. Just what you had the little dun dun dun, sort of some sort of cue from opera. It was so heavy-handed, and this episode is, I'm afraid, filled with some of these really heavy-handed interactions where people are just being so blunt. And to me, I don't want. I think some of this is really George trying to fit in what they want to get out of them. They want Cersei, and Cersei gets around to suggesting that Brienne loves Jaime, and he's looking at it like, how am I supposed to do it? Well, I'm just going to put it out there. And you can say, oh, it's entirely in Cersei's character to be jealous and to throw wild accusations, but
not like that.
It's just so, like, if you want to treat her as someone who can be subtle and sneaky and intelligent, surely it would be more of a bringing it up at edgewise, sideways a little bit, and waiting for Brienne's reaction, rather than just saying outright.
Probing at her a little bit and seeing how she's going to react.
Leading questions, but that is just like, it just drops there, and that ends the conversation. Brienne takes off. That's it. It just felt like it sells Cersei short, and it feels like it sells the actors short.
Yeah.
So I don't know. George wrote it, the episode, and I'm guessing it's his work. But again, remember, he's an employee. He gets a whole outline that says we need X, Y, and Z in this episode, and he does it.
We need the characters moved from point
and then in
A
the end,
to point B in terms of interactions.
David and Dan rewrite it, and they tweak it. They've shuffled scenes around, like the bear from George's episode last season was actually Versine, and they have other changes that we know of, but they do. So ultimately, it's up to them to decide, is this good enough? And
does it do what we wanted to do?
And that bit wasn't good enough. It wasn't like, they're little things, but it's like, why have these little things? Like, you could have treated that differently, I think.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the problem with the idea that maybe Cersei honestly, for me, Cersei would almost casually assume that, yeah, of course
Yes.
she's got it from my brother. He's hot.
Yeah.
And
As long as she's not trying to do anything about it.
No, and it's laughable.
It's laughable, yeah.
Tall, ungainly, ugly woman.
Yeah.
It's laughable.
Yeah.
She might make a slight, snide remark,
Yeah.
but sort of hints. I bet you love him, and you're never gonna get him.
Yeah.
That flat out question is just too much.
Yeah.
And to discuss one more thing, but we felt it was just
Yeah.
heavy-handed. The writing, the dialogue, it was really this felt unsubtle to us.
Yeah, and it's a scene with Tywin and Cersei and Oberyn and Ellaria where they're clearly playing up Oberyn's aggressive sides quite a bit, and the way that he interacts with Cersei and Tywin here feels very heavy-handed to us. He, in the span of just a couple of minutes, he manages to twice harp on about Cersei being the former Queen Regent and even calls her Lady Cersei.
That doesn't make sense
no,
at all.
it doesn't
because,
make sense
I
at
mean,
all.
you can say, oh, it's a show canon, but she's the Dowager Queen. That's just she remains a queen. Once a queen, always a queen, basically. So
and sort of poking at Tywin when Tywin mentions Doran. When Doran's gout comes up, that's the brother of Oberyn, who's the actual Prince of Dorne, who is still in Dorne and wasn't able to come. Oberyn sort of poking at Tywin and saying, "Oh, we call that the rich man's disease. Kind of funny that you don't have it." And then that segues into his bit about, there are some places where people look down on bastards, and other places where they think it's wrong to murder women and children, and there's no mistaking the intention there, and. That's not the interaction they have in the books.
In the
from
books,
what we can tell.
from what we can tell, we never directly see Tywin and Oberyn speak, but all we hear of their interactions are that
they seem to have rather pleasant meetings.
Well, I don't want to say pleasant, but it's not like Tywin comes out of them feeling that Oberyn is out for his blood. No. He wants Gregor Clegane's blood.
That's the impression
he has certain grievances against the Lannisters, and Tywin tries to deal with them. But
Tywin thinks that what he does is working quite well. I mean, there are some deals that they are making, basically, and
there's this discussions anyways, and it just feels very heavy, and especially the Cersei thing, repeating it again and again. It's like, okay, once as a little remark, if she kind of tries to clarify it, and he repeats it once, but it's just 3 times. It's sort of like,
because if we look at the wedding in the books, the biggest controversy when it comes to Oberyn and Ellaria is in fact that Tyrion is certain that Cersei will have a fit about Ellaria, a bastard, being placed, at a seat of prominence with the other nobles. While on the other hand, Cersei can't get away with putting her below the salt, which, is where you put the lesser important people. So they have to come up with some sort of compromise that won't insult the Martells and won't have Cersei fuming about the placement of Ellaria, basically.
Yeah, so it just felt again like they're making Oberyn so much more openly antagonistic, and it makes it difficult.
In the books, it's basically enough that he's bringing his paramour, who is a bastard, and taking her to King's Landing, when Cersei's views on bastards, and in general, the non-Dornish areas of Westeros, their views on bastards are well known.
Yeah.
That's sort of the biggest open insult that he offers, as far as we see.
Yeah, that's quite a good point. That is the biggest, and so the show often drops nuance and goes towards the extremes. Like they'll take a thing from the book and they'll say, well, let's dial it up or let's dial it down. I mean, we can see this from last episode. Dorio's presentation is dialed down. Yeah. And here we've got Oberyn's presentation dialed up, and it's a fantastic character. I think I still like Pascal's performance and everything. I don't have an issue with that, or with in Dior Varma's performance as Ellaria. It's just you keep wanting just draw it back a little bit.
This is supposed to be an intelligent character who knows when to push and when to behave.
Yeah. And I always wanted, when we were discussing with Cersei, I could have seen her making some sort of snide remark, some sideways remark, kind of approaching the
Yeah.
idea of Brienne's in love with Jamie. I could see
not
him
the
doing stuff,
outright-
but this outright antagonist,
Yeah.
like again and again and
Yeah.
again, like look at me, you can't do anything about it, you can't do anything, or what are you going to do about it? What are you
Yeah.
going to do?
It also
It's-
feels like
it's
again,
not
sort of, we have to basically bring out the big clue bat for the viewers.
who don't quite get it. So that those are my faults of this episode. And again, some of it is how they've depicted from the start Oberyn. They said, well, we want it dialed up a little. We want it more obvious because we don't want it to be too subtle. And at the other hand, some of it has to be put down at George's feet. He had this brief, and I think he didn't really find the best route. And then David and Dan decided, well, they were happy with it. We're not happy, but I'm sure, I mean, it's a minor nitpick because on the whole, it is a really tight episode, and it's a well done episode. There's a lot of good pieces. I mean, the Ramsay, Roose, the Joffrey Tyrion all worked really well. Some of the set pieces they have, Sigur Rós, I hope you recognize them singing the Reigns of Casimir, and Joffrey throwing them away, tossing some coins at them to send them off.
I did think it was rather interesting the way Marjorie seemed to be at first sort of trying to listen. She did look rather bored actually, and then she sort of made a sort of political effort to try and listen to them, and and then Joffrey had to go.
Nice bit of performance report, kind of just using body language and just those bits. So there are a lot of little good bits about it, and it's a great episode. For me, for people who've read the books, I don't think you're going to get the same catharsis or sort of gut reaction like many had to the Red Wedding. Just because the brutality of it on screen was shocking, even if you knew it was coming, just seeing it. Whereas Joffrey's death, it's sort of, well, I mean, it's now 14 years behind us. You and I and those who read it when the book came out. So we're not going to get the same feeling.
that one doesn't stay with you in the same way.
It doesn't really. No. And I think a lot of what makes that chapter is actually that you're inside Tyrion's head. He's our point of view character for it.
Yes, because I did comment on that, and I think we'll wrap up after this, but I did feel that when I read it recently, as in my quest to finally finish off all the remaining chapters of A Storm of Swords, I did notice that I felt there were quite some similarities between being in Tyrion's head for this wedding and being in Catelyn's head for the Red Wedding, in that they are both at, the wedding, as far as they are concerned, the wedding from hell. Everything is really very uncomfortable and unpleasant, and certainly it's quite squirmy sort of feeling to be in Tyrion's head when he goes through all of this. Yeah, it's not a pleasant.
He's very acerbic. He's not happy.
And he's drinking. I mean, I think that they downplay that a little bit because he's very drunk.
Yeah, I think
he starts early in the morning and makes sure he's good and drunk by the time of the wedding.
So it's a different feeling, but I think certainly I have absolutely no quarrel with any new viewer or any fan who thought it was a fantastic sort of set piece at the end, kind of having all this stuff at this place leading up to that really, really gruesome death of the most hated man in Westeros, I would think. Well, most hated boy in Westeros.
Yeah, well, he is a man on the show.
I guess he's a man on the show, but the king is dead. Long live the king. We will be back then to discuss next week's episode.
Breaker of Chains.
And that one promises to have some interesting stuff with a number of characters.
Yep.